Due to the graphic nature of the personal accounts and content discussed in this podcast, listener discretion is advised. Many episodes will include graphic personal accounts and discussions of child sexual assault, domestic violence, physical abuse, rape, sexual situations, and suicide.
It was worth it. If anyone wants to know, it was worth it. Let me reap what I sow.
Welcome to Latter-day Survivors. I'm Christina. I'll be hosting today's episode, and I do have one of my co-hosts, Kendra, with us in the studio today. I'm really excited for our guest today. Her name is Ashley Denton. Ashley is a life coach and an author. She has recently written a book titled Always Worthy: Healing Generational Trauma in Mind, Body, and Spirit. And it's going to be shortly released. By the time you're listening to this podcast, it will actually be out in the world. So go and check it out. You can find it on Amazon. Ashley, her story includes elements of navigating her Mormon upbringing, as well as how she healed her own body of debilitating rheumatoid arthritis. And a friend of mine actually sent me a link to Ashley's book. And as soon as I read the blurb, I resonated so deeply with so much of what she said. I ran and sought her out on social media and started listening to some other things she had to say and following her. And I invited her to share her story with us, and she has graciously agreed to come and share with us. So Ashley, welcome to Latter-day Survivors. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Awesome. So we just like to let guests kind of tell their story in whatever way works for them. So I'm just going to kind of let you run with it.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you again for having me and for all that you guys do for this community and letting people tell their stories. And as I've listened to some of the podcasts, I have been encouraged and strengthened to also tell my own. Sorry, we're already crying, but I can do this.
You can.
Yes, I wrote a book. Yeah, thank you. I wrote a book called Always Worthy because I think it's so important for people in our community to know that they've always been worthy and that our worth is unchanging. And it took me a long time to discover this for myself. And I'm very excited to tell you my story, but my story may not make very much sense if I don't start at the beginning and explain that I left the church for different reasons that a lot of people do. Some people leave because they read the CES letter, but the CES letter was only confirmation and validation of my choice. I left the church because I was trying to heal my body. And I am an energy worker, and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what my body was trying to tell me. And I always told my friends, I said, we weren't meant to be sick like this, and I'm going to figure this out. And when I do, I'm going to write a book about it, and I won't shut up about it. The thing about that is, though, I didn't realize that the answer to my healing would be so devastating for me to see. Because of the damage that was happening to me from my environment. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about the language of the body for people who are not familiar with this, but our bodies are communicating to us all the time. And we even have a lot of idioms about this. You know, if we're really burdened, we say you're carrying too much on your shoulders. And if you actually are doing that, you can feel it physically in your body. Absolutely. Or if we're really nervous, like I am right now, we have butterflies in our stomach. There's so many ways that we've been understanding this language of our body without directly realizing that it is continuously speaking to us about unhealed trauma and about our environments and how our soul feels in these spaces. And if we don't understand that, the language of our body, the symptoms that come up will only get louder and louder with time. And that's what happened to me. So, and because it's the duty of the mind and to bring the unseen energies to the surface so they can be seen and so they can be healed. And it took me a really long time, unfortunately a little bit too long to figure this out. But as I tell my story, this is really significant to know moving forward, because that's what this is all about. And in the church, I always asked for blessings of healing, and because I was so sick, even debilitated from this disease. And I beat myself up so much because I felt like I didn't have enough faith to be healed. And if I could have only just been faithful enough or good enough, then I could have received the healing I sought. And I didn't realize that I was just sending more of the energy towards myself that was making me sick by beating myself up about that. So, so now I want to take you to my child self and introduce you to her. Because, and also as I tell this story of my child self, you'll see that my body was speaking to me from a very, very young age about my environment. And I was raised in the church, and I didn't really understand all that it meant to be Mormon, but I did know that I loved to sing. And so I loved going to church to sing. And I also really, really loved my family.
Yeah.
And our home was very turbulent. And I was a very empathic child, and I absorbed everything from my environment. And because I loved my family so much, I was continuously trying to figure out how to help them heal. And even as a very young child, I saw in the promises of the church hope that my family could be together, that we could be happy if I was good enough. Like if I kept all the rules, if I and there's nothing more that I wanted than for my family to be whole. My mom worked a lot, and I took care of my younger siblings a lot from a young age, and they had such a special place in my heart, and I really wanted to be a good big sister.
I relate to a lot of that, actually.
And do you?
I do. Yeah.
And there's a lot of pressure on parents, but also older siblings and children in our community, because we are responsible to lead them to a safe place, to be a good example. And that means you can't make mistakes. Like, don't make mistakes, because you're going to lead everyone to hell. That's how I felt anyway.
Yeah. Same.
And that's a lot for a kid to carry. So, and so what ended up happening was my parents got divorced when I was 14. And although it was a good thing because their relationship was so toxic, I felt so betrayed and alone. And my dad moved away to another state, and my brother had an opportunity. My older brother, I was second of 5 children. My older brother left as well. And my mom, she just curled into her broken heart and I lost her.
Mm.
And so I felt very much abandoned, but I also felt that it was my responsibility to take care of this family. And, when everything crumbles, it's a beautiful time to build something new. And so I had this hope in my heart that, my love can heal my family. My love can heal my mom's heart. And so I poured all that I had into this situation. But I was pouring all of my love into a bucket with holes in it. Like, my mom just her heart was so broken. And I understand that now. But as a child,
Yeah.
you don't see it that way. It's just like, you're not good enough, and your love's not good enough, and so you need to try harder. And so I tried really hard to make Mother's Day special, birthdays special, and make sure the house is clean, and I just wanted to heal her. But that didn't work. So, but as a child, that was kind of the situation, and this is kind of what set me up to crashing into a really toxic person. But before I move into my shadow self, I want to talk a little bit more about my relationship with the high demand religion in my youth. We had our history in the church as a family goes right back to its origins. And I remember as a kid, my dad would take us around on Memorial Day to visit graves, and he felt very passionately about our family history. And he would take us to the grave of an ancestor and talk to us about them and tell us their story. And I remember being deeply moved, even as a child, by their faith. And I felt this dedication to the church. Like, I want to be a worthy and faithful member because they were, and I don't want to let them down. And that was a really big part of my childhood. And that is also significant moving forward in my story. So after my parents got divorced, and I kind of became the mom at home because my mom had to work so much and she was just so exhausted and depressed. And in searching for some sort of love and compassion in the world, because I felt so alone, I was 14 at the time, I searched on the internet, and I'm 37 now, so this is like back in the early days of the internet, and this was a very, very dangerous thing for me to do. Actually, in the town I moved to, there was a girl that was found dead, and the murderer lived less than 2 miles from my house, and she found this person online. So I feel very lucky that, because I was an uneducated child searching the internet for love, I'm very grateful that it wasn't worse than it was. But I did find someone to connect with from New York, and this person was my same age, and we spoke every day. And he was unfamiliar with the church and didn't understand a lot about what I talked about. But I had even as a little girl, I had all these dreams. Like, I wanted to marry someone in the temple, and I wanted to be this like worthy, perfect mom and wife, and have all the beautiful things that the church promises from that. And so I talked to this person every day, and He was very abusive, in verbally abusive and mentally abusive. But I stayed and I continued to talk to this person because sorry.
Before you go on, the whole thing about why you stayed. I'm sitting here thinking to myself, like, there were so many things that I did as a teenager and even through my adulthood that I was looking for connection. I was looking for someone to listen. I was looking for love, and I didn't really even know what love was, because in the church and in my family, kind of like yours, there was a lot of turmoil. And my dad wasn't active, and so I wasn't fully accepted in the church. I always felt that level of, your family is not whole. There was a lot of that. So I didn't really even understand what love was. And I think something that maybe you're going to get to this later, because I kind of feel it that's going to happen, but that until we learn how to love ourselves, until we learn how to love who we really are, we're never going to really understand what love is, and what love actually feels like that's healthy. So anyway, I am just on the edge of my seat right now, just listening to your story.
And absolutely too, though, like you're saying in the church, because the closest connection that you're encouraged to have is with a God that is not loving. And you're in a relationship with someone that you fear.
Yep.
And it doesn't feel safe with this person. So this sets you up to be in relationships like this everywhere. Yeah. It's like I've shut down my feelings that this isn't safe and that this isn't okay, because that's normal. That's what I do everywhere I go. Especially with the most sacred connection that I could have with my creator. That's not safe either.
Yeah.
So this has a lot to do.
Yeah. We're taught from a very young age that love is conditional, right? Mm-hmm. So words and actions don't match in the church. They believe that, they love their children unconditionally, but then they kick them out when they're gay. They shun people when they leave the church. God is a conditional, loving God too, and he's a violent God. The God of the Mormon Church is violent. And you're right. We learn how to make relationships, not just with ourselves, because we're violent towards ourselves. We are so hard on ourselves, I think, when we leave the church, or even when we're in the church, especially, that we're never enough. We're never enough. And we hate ourselves. I've heard so many people that say that they've hated themselves when they were in the church, and still took a long time to be able to get out of that. So you're absolutely right. This God is not a loving God. And what you were saying about when you were a child and wanting to heal your family, you as an empathic child were someone who wanted to do what intuitively felt right. But as we go on in the church, we learn to do the opposite, whether it's to ourselves or to other people.
Absolutely. And going back to the language of the body, rheumatoid arthritis is self-destruction, an attack on the self. It's like self-destructing from the inside out. And the very core of that is self-hatred. So,
it's an autoimmune condition, right? So
yes,
autoimmune meaning that your body is actually attacking itself. So your body is not recognizing, or the rheumatoid arthritis, the disease is not recognizing your body as part of what it's supposed to protect, what it's supposed to heal. So that's actually a good analogy for the church.
Yes. And the self-rejection is profound, that the church, kind of births in people is this self-rejection and self-hatred that's so profound. And my message is that that can extend out into your body and into your relationships, like we're talking about. Yeah. And your whole life can self-destruct if you, like, what hurt me most in the church is that I believed, I believed everything they said. Mm-hmm. And that's what hurt me most. Yeah. Okay, so online I met someone from New York City, and I talked to this person every single day. And he was my best friend, I guess you could say, but really he was my only friend, if you want to know the truth. And so he had a silver tongue. He would say all these nice things, but then he would lie to me. He would yell at me. He would call me names and really degrade me. But my heart starved just for someone to say, I care. It didn't matter what else was happening around, like, in the relationship. So he was very manipulative and stuff like that. And I didn't really know this person. We were 2,000 miles away from each other. I didn't really know this person. It was just someone I talked to. And I was so alone that it was better to be in this situation than to be alone in the world. So I thought. That was my mindset at the time. And we didn't agree on a lot of things that we talked about. I mean, we started talking when I was 14, okay? So, and he, like I said, he had no idea what Mormonism was, but I would talk to him about all of my dreams that I had within this organization and stuff like that. And anyways, we ended up meeting in Las Vegas. Our mothers brought us to Las Vegas to meet each other because we had been talking over the phone for so long. They're like, well, we could bring them to meet each other. And we had spoken about intimacy before, and I told him, oh, that's like a big no, we can't do that. If I do that, then I'll lose all these things and I'd be such a bad person, as bad as a murderer. And, and he didn't get that. And, but when I met him, we walked around circus together. That's where we went. And, he held my hand and he was saying, oh, I with his silver tongue, I want to take you to the temple someday and like do all these great things. And in my little girl brain, I thought that was so wonderful and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And, but it was just words. And then, we were allowed to go, to, the circus little indoor amusement park thing they have there, and I got to spend the day with just him, and I was so excited. And he told me that he forgot something in his room, and so I went with him. I didn't have anywhere else to go. I'm not just going to hang out by myself in circus. So I went with him, and so on the way up there in the hallway, he surprised me when he kissed me, and then he kissed me again, and I started to feel uncomfortable as he started pushing my body up against the wall and touching me, and my little Mormon girl brain was racing, and I wasn't sure what to do, and I was frozen, and I felt like I couldn't get away. And so the elevator door opened, and thankfully it was, some people came out and started walking down the hallway. And so he stopped what he was doing, and I felt so relieved, but then they were gone. And so we started again. And I was crumbling inside because this is not what I wanted. And I had felt like I made that clear. But anyways, and so after some time, the elevator door opened again, and it was security guards. And they were coming to see if I was okay. And I just, I kept saying, I'm fine. Like, I just wanted them to leave, because I didn't want to get in trouble. And this boy, finally I convinced the security guards that I was fine, and I was crying And I like kind of just leaned up against the wall and sat on the floor, and I just did not know what to do. And while the security guards were with us, this boy had his arm around me and was, telling him, "Oh, she's just crying, she's okay," and like just manipulating the situation. And I did not know how to stand up for myself. And I think, like we talked about, how women are kind of programmed to be silent and to just be a chameleon to their environment, and we don't have a right to say this isn't okay, or even I'm scared. Anyways, so I was crumbling inside, and I didn't have anywhere else to go. I felt like I couldn't go to my mom. Number one, I didn't know where she was. Number two, had I known and had I gone to her, she would have been so disappointed in me for even being in that situation. And so anyways, he invited me to his room, and I went in, and to this person, I lost my virginity. And sorry. So, and that's just a little snapshot of what my experience was like with this person moving forward. It was always like this, and I always silenced myself to be in alignment with anyone who would say they care, or that they love me, even if their actions were absolutely toxic and inappropriate. So when I came back home and started going to church, because church was so important to my mom, and I knew I needed to go, and I tried, and we would learn, in church, you don't even need to be there very long before you hear about the law of chastity and how horrible it is if you break it. And like I said earlier, this is the sin next to murder. And because of this situation, I grew up literally feeling like I was as bad as a murderer. And children should not feel that way about themselves. And it's actually because of the damage of this teaching, and what it can do to a child, is why I wrote my book. It's a huge reason about, it's actually the thing that pushed me forward to speak my truth. Even though it's scary for me, children should not grow up feeling this bad about themselves. So with those teachings, it was really difficult for me, and I ended up being so depressed and so self-hating that I stopped going to church because I couldn't handle it. I would have panic attacks at church all the time because of how bad I felt about myself in that environment. And I remember thinking, if I would sit down in the pew and I would look up, and you know how they have all of the hymns posted that that you're going to sing for the meeting, and so I would look through them and hold each one, the place of each song with my fingers, and I would say, okay, if I can just make it to the next song without crying, and that was my goal, is just like from one song to the next, if I can just make it. That's how difficult it was for me to be there. And so anyways, I ended up just not going anymore. But I didn't just drop out of church. I dropped out of school. I dropped out of life. And I shut down. And I didn't realize at the time that this was because of trauma. I just thought I was messed up and couldn't handle life. But it is because I hated myself so much that I shut down in this way. So I was out of school for a year, and I just played mom. I was, made sure I took care of the kids and everything. And during this time, I was still with this person. And so my mom, after a year out of school, this was my sophomore year, my mom's like, we got to get you doing something, you know. So she signed me up to go to an alternative high school. And this was the greatest gift of my life. At this high school, there were no cliques. Everyone celebrated everyone in their progression. It was such a different experience than what you would get from church, for example. And I met a really loving teacher that helped me see that I'm not garbage and that I could create something better in my life. And it's because of these people that I decided to try. And so I started having dreams that were my own. Like, maybe I'll go to college, maybe I won't give up. And then I graduated from there, and I'm still in communication with this guy from New York. We see each other occasionally. And so one time he was in Utah, and I took him to meet my grandma, and she had visitors there, and it was a family from Nigeria. And I was surprised after this visit. 2 weeks later, I got a call from this Nigerian lady asking me to go live with her. And what she said, the first thing she said, Nigerians just say it like it is. And she said, Ashley, your boyfriend's no good. And you should come live with me. And I don't know why, but it's like I needed someone to say that. And give me hope for something better. And so she wanted me to come live with her, get a job in a hospital, and do all these things. And so I went, and I dumped my boyfriend and started a new life. And while I was out there, I had an experience that was with a divine and very loving presence. I came home from work, and I had felt so bad about myself still. And I remember falling on the floor and praying, like, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for all that I am. And right when I said that, it was like this water came over me and reminded me of my worth. And it was the most spiritual experience I've ever had up until this day. The unfortunate thing about this is that this experience of healing that I had led me back to the only place I felt like I could find God, the only place that goodness could come from, the church. And so I dedicated myself. I'm like, okay, so if I'm being given this healing and this love from this divine something, I didn't know what it was at the time, but I felt like I should dedicate myself to the church. And this is when I dove in deep to the church. If only I could be worthy. And I chose to live a life of hypervigilance, and it was extreme. I stopped listening to all music that I loved and only listened to church music. I stopped watching TV altogether. Just my life. I only read scriptures, general conference talks. I just wanted to be worthy. And so
Do you know the term scrupulosity?
oh yeah,
Okay.
that was me.
Yeah.
That was me.
So, yep, me too.
Mm-hmm.
So, I had kind of a similar experience when I was a teenager. We don't need to go into detail because this isn't about me, but And after getting out of that experience, or going, repenting and coming back to the church, I dove in with everything that I had. And I dedicated my time, my talents, and all with which I had been blessed, to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They say that to us in so many ways, that we are owned by the church. It's not that we belong to it. We are owned by it. And when you are so scrupulous and putting everything you have into this group, this cult, this entity, that is not good for you, the scrupulosity and the amount of time that you put into it makes it so you don't have time to think for yourself or think about anything else. So that's kind of what I'm hearing from you, and that's my experience. So is that kind of what you experience as well? Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. And I forgot that word. That's such a weird word. So I forgot what it's called, but I have heard of that. And the first time I heard of it, also, that's what I thought. I said, wow, I had a legitimate disorder at this point. And it's followed me for quite some time. So things didn't work out in California. I wasn't able to go to nursing school because you have to pay out of state tuition and all these things. So I ended up coming back home. And but I remember when I finally had enough courage to tell my mom what I had been through, and my sister. And my younger sister said, "Ashley, you're still my hero." And so I wanted so bad to be a hero worth having, which only set me into this extreme hypervigilance even more. And my mom just put her head in her hands and said, "We'll talk about this later." And at this time, I didn't see what I went through as a trauma. I was taking full responsibility for this. But my mom and I, even up until this day, have never spoken about this. Also, I was never even talked about, I was never given the talk either. That this was all new to me, which also made it really traumatic. But what my mom did do is she sent me to the bishop. And so, and the bishop, of course, let me know what a terrible sin this was, and asked me to read The Miracle of Forgiveness. And that book is, I'm sure you guys have spoken of this before. It's taken off the shelves. They don't sell it anymore. You can't even find. They have parts of it on LDS.org, but they took the most toxic parts out. And
I had to read that book too, and I still have it, I think.
Oh dear.
And I was looking through, after I left the church, all the things that I had highlighted and underlined, my notes in the margins, journals that I had written about my repentance process. And quite honestly, your situation, you were raped.
That's what my therapist said.
Okay.
Yeah.
You were raped. There was no responsibility on your part for what happened to you. And I want you to know that I see that. And even though you have not used that word yet, your virtue, your virginity was taken from you by force.
100%.
By manipulation.
Yeah.
None of that is your fault. None of it. But you get to live with the consequences of it. You get to live with the consequences of the scrupulosity and the beliefs about yourself because of what you were told by your bishop and by your religion. Our belief about ourselves and our responsibility in certain situations is really messed up when we are a member of the church. And I know that that's probably true for other churches. But I just want you to know that I see that you were raped, that it's not just your therapist telling you that it's not you trying to believe it now, that it is a fact that you were raped, and then you were manipulated into staying in that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not your fault. None of it.
Okay.
And I'll echo everything that Kendra just said.
And that means everything to hear from you and from my therapist, because like I said, I took full responsibility. And, and even in Miracle of Forgiveness, he says that when he's talking about our virtue, he says, once given or taken or stolen, it cannot be regained. Even in a forced contact, such as rape or incest, the injured one is greatly outraged. If she has not cooperated and contributed to the foul deed, she is, of course, in a more favorable position. There is no condemnation where there is no voluntary participation. It is better to die in defending one's virtue than to live having lost it without a struggle. And it's because of this that I should have fought harder. I should have so yeah. And
do you know about fight or flight, right? Do you know about fight or flight?
Yeah.
Fight, flight, freeze, fawn. You did what you needed to do to protect yourself in the moment. Mm-hmm. You were scared. You were not safe. Mm-hmm. And this fight or flight response is not a voluntary response.
Right.
It's like when we're little kids. So little kids who have been abused disassociate from what's happening to their body. When you're in a situation that you were in, that you had no understanding, no education, if this happens, then you should do this. No guidance. Just that if you lose your virtue, you lose your virginity, it's your fault. Mm-hmm. You couldn't find your mom. You didn't know where she was. They were assuming that because you two had been speaking over the phone, that this was a relationship that was safe, and it wasn't. And you didn't have that knowledge. And when you fawned, when you froze, you didn't have the ability to run away because you didn't know what to do. Mm-hmm. Your body did what it had to do to survive. That's the reality of your situation. Mm-hmm. You didn't have a choice.
Yep.
Gosh, I'm glad I talked to you guys today. Right. Right. And so as a child, when I went to go speak with this bishop that doesn't understand what led me to a place like this, doesn't understand, all he saw was, you broke the law of chastity, and you are now given the label of unworthy. It broke me. It really broke me. And not going through this and not understanding how much help I did need to process this pain. I had no one to talk to, and even my mom. And the only person I could talk to was throwing labels at me and shaming me. And children shouldn't have to go through this. Ever.
Bishops are not trauma informed. I'm just going to say that. They are not trauma informed. They are not trained to be in that role. And by doing what he did to you, he created another layer of trauma.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Instead of being a person who is supposed to be a counselor, a confidant, the bishop, the father of the ward, the person who's supposed to help protect and guide. Instead, he created more trauma for you and more pain for you because they don't know what the fuck they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
they don't know that until maybe way later when they're, when their own children are grown, and maybe they've had this conversation with one of their children, or maybe they never have this conversation with their children because they just avoid it and label their own children unworthy.
Mm-hmm.
It's really a messed up system that's not supportive in any way of trauma survivors. And I dare to say that every person that is a member of the church is a trauma victim. And when they leave the church, they are a trauma survivor, and they can actually start processing that trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one of the most difficult things that any of us can do, is to leave that environment and to realize how traumatizing it was.
Absolutely. And I'm being reminded of what you said, Kendra, about the freeze response, and like while you're in the church, you're doing what you need to survive. Like, I just gotta be worthy. I gotta do all these things. And you don't, like my experience with this guy, you don't realize until later how much that wounded you. It's a hidden trauma, and until someone helps you see it. And that's why therapy was so healing for me. So absolutely. And so what I did is, I finally became worthy. He said it's going to take some time, and I worked through that and finally became worthy. And a couple years later, I had someone asked me if I was going to serve a mission, and I thought, oh, no, girls like me can't do that. Like, I'm too unworthy. I still felt that label on my life. And but then I thought, maybe this is a way that I could tell God I'm sorry, make up for all of my mistakes. So I thought, okay, maybe I will. And so I talked to my bishop, and I got worthy to go. And in the MTC is when I had my first big flare of rheumatoid arthritis. And my companion, because I started struggling to write and to dress myself, kneeling to pray was excruciating, and we did that continuously through the day. And I realized something was really wrong with my body. And when I started to slow down when we were walking, because it got so bad, my companion forced me to go see the MTC doctor. And I didn't want to go because I worked so hard to get there, and they were going to send me home. And all this work to be worthy and to tell God I'm sorry and be a good example to my sister and heal my family, like make things right, would be thrown away. So at the MTC, the doctor told me that I had rheumatoid arthritis, and they gave me steroids to make it through, but I wanted to stay on my mission. They didn't give me really the option to go home or stay. They didn't make that a thing. He thought that I would be able to find more help in the mission field. So my disease really flared in my mission. And really debilitated me. The worst of all my joints was my left shoulder. And in the language of the body, this is carrying burdens that don't belong to you. And when I returned home from my mission, I was going to make sure that I married I had this list of all that I wanted in a future spouse. And looking back, that list was not mine. It was the church's list, priesthood holder, returned missionary, all these things. And I ended up dating someone that had everything on the list, and he ended up being the biggest jerk of all time. So I'm glad that my list didn't work out as well. And I ended up meeting someone who went to the same alternative high school as I did. We actually went to middle school together as well. He asked me to be his girlfriend, and we never talked, though we were actually voted the two shyest kids in the whole school at Cache High, the school we went to. We have a really awkward picture together. Anyways, so I ended up reconnecting with this person, with Adam, my husband, and our connection was also, he was trying to come back to church and saw that I had served a mission, and he really wanted some support on that journey. And as a return missionary, I was so excited to help this friend of mine come back to church because I knew how difficult it was. But then surprising to me because I was not expecting this, but I fell in love with Adam, and we got married. And once again, the intimacy was so difficult for me because I was reminded of how bad my body makes me. And that really, really effed up our marriage because all I could hear in my mind is like how bad I am. And so the church really put a wedge in me even having healthy relationships with healthy people, and loving people.
Same, by the way. Same.
Really? I'm so sorry.
Same for me as well. Same exact experience. Yeah.
Well, the church teaches you from the time that you're from the time you're little, but in young women's, it's anything about sex is no, 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 no. Mm-hmm. Bad, 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 bad. If you do it before you're married, you are bad and you're unworthy. And then you get married and it's like, okay, go have sex.
Right.
And go make babies. We just don't have an understanding of what a healthy sexual relationship is with somebody else or with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And even our bodies are ashamed to, like, especially as women, our bodies are bad. Our bodies are the enemy. And so it was so healing for me to find that my body's actually my best friend, my compass, and so I totally agree with that.
In the church, we're taught overtly and kind of covertly that our bodies are responsible for the thoughts of boys and men, for their impure thoughts. And instead of them having responsibility for controlling their thoughts and their behaviors, instead, the onus is put on us as women as being responsible for their thoughts and their feelings. And then when you get married, it's like, okay, well, how do you develop a relationship where you're both physically attracted to each other if you don't use your body in that way? How do you create a healthy relationship with someone?
Yep. And that's so true. And I struggled with this for years, and I didn't know what the problem with me was. I could not figure it out. Took me too long to figure it out. And while Adam and I were married, we still are married, but my hypervigilance continued, and I was always trying to, I accepted absolutely every calling, every invitation to clean the church, like everything. I never said no because I didn't know I could. I thought I was saying no to God, right? If I said no. Even I just had our first baby, and I was in nursing school, and they asked me to be primary president, and I accepted it and really struggled in nursing school and in my motherhood, and because I put God first, and I wanted to make sure I did that the best I could, and then everything else, because I just wanted to be worthy.
Well, and then go ahead.
No, go ahead. You go.
No, I was just, we've talked about this before, this idea that we never ever learned how to set boundaries. That's in part why, because we weren't allowed to have any boundaries in the church at all. You had to say yes to everything. You had to accept everything. And I understand that. I also accepted callings while I was a new mom with little babies, and we're both nurses, by the way. And I working 12-hour night shifts and suffering, and I mean suffering, debilitatingly bad postpartum depression, still accepting the callings, still, because there's no boundaries.
Right.
Yeah. When I was in nursing school, I was also still in the church, and I believed, like you were saying, that if I put God first, which meant putting my callings first, so my priorities were, God, my callings, my family, maybe my family was before my callings, but oftentimes not, that everything else would fall into place. And so I believed that the things that were falling into place, the things that were for my highest good, were attributed to the fact that I was being a worthy member of the church, that I was actually doing everything that I was supposed to do in the church. So because I put those things first, I graduated nursing school. Because I put those things first, I was able to do the things that I felt like I needed to do or wanted to do. But the reality is it just made it harder. It just made it so much harder than it needed to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And I struggled so much because of this mindset as well. And one thing there's so many cool things about my husband, but my husband walked beside me as I'm going through all of this with the church, and in my efforts to be pleasing to them or whatever. But my husband was able to keep himself separate from them because he saw me dissolving into everything they asked of me. But my husband never dissolved himself to be called theirs. And this ended up being one of the greatest gifts for me. But he stopped going to church early on in our marriage. And in my Mormon brain, this was so traumatic for me. This was so sad. And I remember thinking, our family's falling apart. And, I was just so devastated by this, not realizing that he was actually doing something really healthy for himself. And so the church kind of got to a point where it was breaking my health, my sense of self-worth, my life, and my marriage. And this is when things really took a turn for me, because I also had gotten so sick in this hypervigilant state that I was in, that I had to dress myself at night so I could get up in the morning and take care of my children, because the morning stiffness was so profound that it took me forever to get dressed. I would also take bowls and anything out of the cupboards that we needed for breakfast down onto the counter so I could handle life in the morning. And I was so sick. And also I took all the medications they asked me to take, and the side effects were equal to the disease itself. And so I was doing everything I could to find healing. I tried veganism and, clean eating, every diet trick that someone mentioned to me, but I just continued to be very ill. And so under the crippling pressure that I was in, I finally got the courage to ask my bishop if I could be released, because I was in the primary presidency again at this time, with 3 children at home and a crippling disease. And I was so obedient to the church. I don't know if you remember when the presidency asked that we stop wearing sandals to church because we shouldn't look like we're going to the beach. We need to look like we're going to church. And my feet...
I don't remember that one, but that's hilarious.
Right. Well, do you remember, Christina? Oh, okay. Well, I remember thinking, wow, okay, so I would wear flip-flops because my toes were deformed from the disease. So I would shove my deformed feet, this was so painful, into church shoes to go to church, so I could do it right. I just wanted to do it right. And but I remember that I finally had the courage to say, this calling is too much for me and I need to be released. And it was so scary for me to do. I know people do this all the time, but for me, this was a really big deal. And then the next week, I was shamed in church for that. They released all these people, and well, no, they called all these people to new callings, and then they released me, and my bishop cried. And he was saying, I just want people to know that, like, when they faithfully serve, they'll be blessed. Just like you were saying earlier, Kendra, like, you'll be blessed. And so I thought, oh, I just threw all these, blessings away, and I'm not pleasing God. And I was so upset at myself. And anyways, it was like within a week or 2 weeks, I was given another calling and they asked me to be a primary teacher. So I think their thinking was like, this is a lesser, like, it's not going to take as much out of you kind of calling. But it's like, I finally spoke my truth. This is too much. And I was not heard at all. And so at this time, my faith was really struggling. They started telling us how we should bear our testimony at church. I loved talking about what I was learning and like the beautiful experiences I have with the divine and, stuff like this. And they said, you just need to bear your testimony about the Book of Mormon, the prophet, the restoration, the end. And that's what they were doing in our ward. And it was so robotic, and church just lost all its beauty at this time. And I was struggling so much to go, even just get dressed to go to church. I was struggling in my callings, and my marriage was struggling. And so this is kind of what set up me really asking myself, is this what I should be doing? Like, is this healthy for me? So it wasn't the CES letter. It wasn't, all these things. It was, I don't know if the environment is healthy for me and my family.
Did you ever get told the phrase, there are those who are called to teach and there are those who are called to test? Did you ever hear that?
No, I haven't heard that one.
So I actually had that conversation about that phrase with my mom, because she would say that all the time about especially about bishops or teachers who are not therapeutic or empathetic in their conversations with people. That there are those who are called to test us, and maybe those people are actually teaching other people, but for us they're a test. And there are those people who are called to teach us. And so what do I need to learn from this experience, instead of saying, look, this person is abusive, and whether they're teaching somebody else or being therapeutic to somebody else doesn't matter to me, because they are being abusive to me. It's not a test. This is not a test. It's not a test of my worthiness. It's not a test of my endurance. This is abuse.
Yeah. But you're not, you can't look at it that way in the church, right?
No, you can't.
It's so sad, because that happens all the time. And I also, because I was so sick, I couldn't work anymore. And so tithing was another thing that was just really messing with us. I remember a friend up the street knew that we were struggling, and her dad works at a grocery store. And so all the expired food they sent to her, and she will feed it to pigs. And she knew we were struggling, so she invited me to her home to see what she had. And she said, just take whatever you want, whatever you don't take, we'll just feed to the pigs. And I remember feeling so much shame, and I know the church offers, help for people in financial trouble, but I wanted to be able to take care of myself. Like, we didn't want to be in a situation like that. So it was also, the church was financially breaking us too, because I wanted to be worthy so bad. Got to pay him all this money. I need to stay worthy. So I lost my worthiness because we fell behind in our tithing. And I was just in a desperate need for compassion, but I just couldn't find it anywhere. I couldn't find it. So this is when I really started to struggle. And I remember one day my husband was playing with our children in the family room, and I could hear them giggling, and my kids love their dad. He's the best dad. I really lucked out. He's a really good person. But in this moment, while I was doing the dishes, my heart sank, and I was thinking of how grateful I was for my wonderful husband that's bringing so much joy to our home. But then I remembered, but our family can't be eternal because Adam doesn't want anything to do with the church, really. And my heart sank, and I felt this really heavy sadness come over me. And this is when my story changes everything. Everything changed in this moment. And right when I felt that sorrow, I heard a man yell in my ear. And it was like this, it was a cry. It was something that I've never experienced before. And so I went to the family room and asked my husband, "Did you hear? Someone just yelled in our house. Did you hear?" I checked the windows, the doors to see if anything was open, and nothing was. And my husband's like, "No, I didn't hear anything." And so I realized that this was an experience that was all my own, and I thought, gosh, am I going crazy? Or if I heard a spirit, are they angry at me? Like, why are they yelling? And I thought I was feeling so good about my family when that happened. Why is someone yelling at me? But then I remembered the very moment that I heard that yell was when I was feeling this great sadness and sorrow about a family that can't be eternal. And so this is a very significant experience moving forward, because I continue to struggle with my faith at church, and I prayed about it, and I kept getting like little answers like I should stay or I should go, and I wasn't sure. And I thought, okay, so I really need to know what I should do. My eternal salvation is at stake. This means everything, and my family history has given their lives to this church from the very beginning, and I need to know why. And so before I leave the church, before I cut this tie, I have to know why, because maybe in studying their words, I can reignite my faith, and I can rededicate myself to the church that they gave their hearts to, because I did not want to abandon my ancestors. And so I began to study a journal of a grandfather of mine. It's actually online. I found it, and I started studying my grandfather's journal. And I always thought he was one of my coolest ancestors because we were born on the same day. We have the same birthday. And he has a home built in Franklin, Idaho that he built. He has a very rich history and influence in the place that I grew up. And so he was kind of like a legend. While studying my grandfather's journal, I realized that his life profoundly changed when his family joined the church as well. And his parents were of the Universalist faith. They believed very much in a loving God, and they didn't believe that anyone could be outside of God's love or presence. And they lived on a beautiful orchard and farm in Vermont. And the family had everything they need. They had schooling close by, and his grandparents lived close by. Like, it was a beautiful upbringing. And when the church came in is when everything changed. And he was baptized when he was 14. And I think it's very interesting and significant that both of our lives significantly changed when we were 14. And as I was reading his words and seeing all the ways that his story lines up with mine, I realized I was living out a generational wound, a very profound wound. And the echoes of my life from his were profound. So his family joined the church, and they were preparing, because Joseph Smith called everyone to Nauvoo. They were preparing to leave, so they sold everything that they had, and they left well, the mom got sick and died, and he had a younger baby brother that died. And then it was time for them to leave. And so they had to leave all that sadness behind. And as they were preparing to leave, he had an older brother that got very sick and couldn't travel with them. And he died before they reached Nauvoo. So he lost 3 of his family members in a very short amount of time. And so they get to Nauvoo and discover that they were called to move to a place that was in great turmoil. It was not a safe place to live. But his father chose to, set roots down anyway, started building a home for his family. And while this was happening, his father got sick and died as well. So just like my life, like everything was dead, people were dying inside in my world, and shutting down. And I lost all of them to a certain degree, And then my grandfather, the same thing happened to him. He lost pretty much everyone, and he felt great responsibility for his younger siblings as well. And he was very worried about where they would live, because after his father died, his uncle came into town to settle his father's affairs and sold everything and took the money for himself and left. And so my grandfather and his siblings were orphans in a very dangerous environment. And just like what happened to me after losing all of what I felt was family, I dedicated myself to the church, and my grandpa did the same thing. And we both lived in a way, like whatever the church asks, anything we can do to be in alignment with this church, we'll do it. And we were both caught in very vulnerable times in our lives that led us to a place where it was like a trauma bond with the church for my grandfather and for me. So he ends up serving a mission for the church when he's old enough. He was called to be a member of the 70s at age 18. And he ends up getting married, and that's when things started getting really bad. And Brigham Young asked the members of the church to leave in the middle of February, in the middle of winter, to leave Nauvoo because he was counterfeiting money and the government was after him. The church actually had it set up with those who were persecuting them that they would leave in the spring when they would actually have a successful voyage. But because of the government after Brigham Young and him running away to save his butt, he asked the members of the church to follow him. And because my grandfather believed, and because his wife believed, they followed him. And because they left in the middle of winter without the needed food and supplies, they suffered greatly from malnutrition. And because they were in such a tricky spot, his wife got sick and died. And this happened because they believed, this, because they could have left later. They could have left when it was safe, when they had the supplies they needed, when they had the food, when the weather was better. But so many, this is not a unique story. So many people died because they believed. And so that really floored me to see how how faithful he was and how much he suffered. And we're just getting started, So then
so before you go on, I wanted to make a connection that just kind of came up in my mind, that the church hasn't changed since then.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Brigham Young was doing something wrong. Brigham Young was trying to get away from facing consequences. And instead of just facing those consequences for himself, he took everybody with him. And he made it so that everybody else was unsafe, crossing the plains, not thinking about their welfare. Well, what does the church do now? The church expects us to pay tithing before we pay our heat, before we pay our mortgage, before we pay any of our necessities in our own lives, because if we do, then we are worthy and we are faithful. If we don't, then we won't receive blessings. But what really happens is that the church is self-serving and that they are looking out for themselves. They are not looking out for the people. They're not looking out for any of us. When we're at the very bottom and we're the ones that are feeding the mouths at the top, the only thing I can think of about the church is that it's a pyramid scheme, and it always has been.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you use that analogy and you use those particular words, because the thing that keeps coming back to me as you guys are talking about this is this concept of self-reliance that the church teaches. So it's kind of this, there's a lot of irony involved here, because on the one hand, they're constantly teaching, be self-reliant. I mean, they have whole programs that are tailored around this idea of self-reliance. So they expect us to take care of ourselves, to take care of our own needs, to take care of everything that we need and be completely self-reliant, while at the same time saying, while you're being self-reliant, don't forget to take the first 10% and give it to us. Mm-hmm. How does that make them self-reliant? Number one, it's speaking out both sides of your mouth. If they really wanted us to be self-reliant, then teach us to take care of our responsibilities first, right? But they don't do that. And then it becomes even more sinister when you do everything you're supposed to do. You're faithful. You pay the tithing. You do everything you need to do. And when you still can't be completely self-reliant and you go and ask for help, that comes with a whole caveat of, well, you need to come and serve more and work in the cannery. And essentially you have to pay back what they're giving you. It's so convoluted. It's extremely convoluted.
And with that comes shame.
Absolutely.
Right? Because you're ashamed that you're not being self-reliant. And you have to ask for help. So that also teaches us that it's not safe to ask for help. Mm-hmm. And not just from the church, but it's not safe to ask for help from anybody, because we don't want to be a what, Christina?
A burden. That's our favorite thing, because Kendra and I have big issues with not wanting to be burdens. Yeah.
Yep.
I understand that a lot. Mm-hmm. Thank you for bringing that up too, though, because that's what reading my grandfather's journal did for me. The patterns, like you're bringing it all into the present. The patterns in the church are the same from the very beginning. It's not like they have this magical beginning and then we are struggling because we're lacking all this faith. It's like, nope, it's been toxic from the very beginning, and it's been hurting people profoundly from the very beginning. And in so many different ways. And what you mentioned about the tithing, there are so many times over and over and over again in my grandfather's journal where he's like, well, can't feed my family, but I know I need to pay tithing first. And he even requested us at one point, he was a bishop in Franklin, and he requested that they could please just let them just this one time not pay their tithing, because the whole community was suffering for want of food so much. But the church refused, and so he paid because he believed. And so the lack of compassion as well is consistent from the beginning. And one of the other things that I noticed in my grandfather's journal is that he was sick. He was sick all the time. He would, it's almost as if the patterns that make us sick lifted up off the page, and I saw myself in the patterns. And that's what so much of my book is about, because we can do energy work till we're blue in the face. We can try all these special diets. We can do all of these things to heal ourselves. But it's not going to work if we stay in the same environments that created the energies that made us sick. And And so my grandfather would have like these moments of, having to abandon himself to please his environment, or being judged, unjustly time and time again, or being forced to work when he cannot work anymore, or give when he has nothing more to give, over and over again. And then his body would respond to that experience with a flare. And what blew my mind the most is that he said in his journal that the thing that hurt him most was his left shoulder, which, as I said at the beginning of this podcast, my left shoulder hurt the most. And he said, I am suffering greatly from rheumatism in my left shoulder. And when I read that line while I was studying my grandfather's journal, I was in physical therapy for my left shoulder. And that was just another confirmation. This is a generational wound. And and as I studied my grandfather's words, I realized that the man that I heard yell in my ear that day when I was so devastated about my family falling apart was my grandfather. And on the other side, he sees all that his family has gone through because of this organization, and he's done. And he wants his family to be free. Wow, I could talk for hours about all that my grandfather went through. After he served lots of missions, and while he served in one mission for 24 years, but in the middle of that mission, his wife died, and he was so full of grief, and he asked the church if he could please come home to be with his children again, because they'd been separated from each other for so long, and the church said no. And so he continued out there alone and only to serve the church, But he did that because he believed. He did that because he loved God. And he wanted to do what was right. But they took advantage of his kind and gentle heart over and over again. He worked on a dam in Arizona. Another interesting side note is that's where I served my mission as well, Arizona. And but he worked on this dam like the whole time he was in Arizona, and it kept failing, and he would rebuild, and it kept failing. And the church, at the end of so many years of service, because they hired him to do this, they decided to not pay him again. And he lived in poverty. I know, he lived in poverty. And I mean, even if you just look at pictures of him, he's got this worn, very thin body, and compare that to the leaders of the church. They're very well taken care of. They had everything they needed. They did not have to work their body to the bone for the glory of God. They didn't do that, but he did because he believed. And just
comparing with your own story, right? I'm just making this observation that, you talk about repeating this generational wound and living out this generational wound. What did you do? You essentially did the exact same thing. You wore yourself to the bone. You accepted all the callings. You did all these things while your needs were not being taken care of or being met. And just as the church took advantage of the kindness of your grandfather, they took advantage of your kindness as well.
Mm-hmm. And that's why reading my grandfather's journal was so healing for me, because I saw myself in him, and I saw him in me.
Absolutely.
And so after reading this journal, I realized that I could not stay in the church anymore. I couldn't. And so I left the church because I studied my family history in an effort to strengthen my faith. That's why I left. And man, and there's so much more in my book about what my grandfather went through. But after I chose to leave, and after I left the church, my body started getting better. And after I learned my own worth and I started to rediscover my own light, outside of their organization, and realized that it was with me all along, and that my worth was with me all along, my body started to heal. And I am now medication and pain-free because I left the church.
That's
And
so amazing.
well, and people, and when if my joints are severely deformed, when I say I have rheumatoid arthritis, it's not like I had some discomfort. It's
Right.
like I was crippled. I was crippled by this. And the doctors told me there's no way out of this. But my heart said, no, that is not true. You did not come here to be sick like this. Our bodies are amazing. And they can't just all of a sudden malfunction because you had dairy, when
Right.
you were able to your whole life.
Right.
It's not like that. And so I've learned to focus on the energies underneath what's going on in everything that I do, because it's the energies underneath that affect us the most. And when I really was brave enough to look at it, the energies underneath the church were nothing healthy.
Right.
And like we've discussed through this whole podcast, that they were sending me incredibly negative energy in moments of trauma. They were making me feel like my family is broken when it wasn't. Like, just there's so many times that that's been happening, but I just said okay because they speak for God, and realizing that they didn't and they never did really broke my heart, because there's so many people like me that believe, so many people like me that do everything they can to stay in alignment with the church. So that's why I feel so passionately about being a religious trauma coach, and also speaking up for those who believe, those who are vulnerable, those who are going through a hard time and being taken advantage of in those times.
Absolutely. It's such an incredible story. I'm sitting here just in awe, like wondering, I'll bet your grandfather didn't even have a clue about the gift that he was leaving. It makes me emotional, that how this gift, by journaling all of his experiences, I'll bet he didn't even know how many generations he was going to affect with this. I'll bet he didn't have any idea that this was going to heal his posterity on a level he could not even imagine, Yeah.
Yes. And actually, since I heard my grandfather that day, and I know this is kind of an interesting story and people may not even believe me, but my relationship with him, because he has come into my life, I feel like he's always been a guardian angel, actually, but because I have become aware of him and his love. I have experienced a familial love like I have never known. And what he wants me to know, and a message that he wants to share with everyone, is that this eternal family business that the church talks about and teaches about. The reason my grandfather cried in my ear that day when I was so devastated about my broken eternal family was that it is impossible for a man on this planet to break the bonds of love, the energetic cords that you have between you and another person that were built on your love. Like, there's no way that could be broken. And even my grandpa is saying, like, I'm with you now. And, they can't break, it's just the audacity they have to say that they have the power to seal and keep and protect anything is garbage.
It's all garbage. It's all garbage. It's so much of this is resonating, and that's part of the reason I reached out to you, is just because just so much of everything you were saying about healing this generational trauma spoke so loudly to my heart. Because like you, I've had an experience where my deceased grandmother is also one of my guardian angels, and is with me all the time. And I think I said this to you in a private message when we were still talking, and I just want to shout it from the rooftops. I never understood this concept until I went through this myself. This idea that when we heal ourselves and we heal our own trauma, we aren't just healing the people that are coming after us. We actually are healing the people that came before us. We're actually healing our own ancestors when we are doing the things that they didn't have the opportunity to do. And they're here for us, and they are cheering us on, and they're guiding us through this process. And I know, like you say, everybody's got kind of a different belief system in what they believe in that. But for me, that has been an absolute truth for me. I know categorically that some of the work I'm doing today is healing my ancestors before me. And it's this very loving, symbiotic relationship that we're kind of working together. And it's beautiful.
Absolutely. And something I experienced to kind of confirm what you're saying is after I read the journal, after I left the church, after I reclaimed my life and my power, I had a dream. And in the dream, everything was black. But I knew that my energy was there and my grandfather's energy was there. And ooh, I'm getting chills, sorry. So, and then
okay.
in the dream, I had this big black cloud. I don't even know. It felt like this big block of energy was taken from my gut area, like the solar plexus area, and it was taken from me, and my grandfather took it and left. And that was the whole dream. And when that happened, I was like, oh, I'm so sad he's not going to be with me anymore. But he is. But that was very symbolic that we did this together. Like, we healed this together, and I'm taking it now, and you don't have to carry it anymore. And so it's been such a beautiful, incredibly beautiful journey with my ancestor. And I know, just like you said, the more we heal ourselves, the more we heal them. And they are crying out for healing, especially in the LDS community.
Yes, because they didn't have the voice that we are having the opportunity to have today. They didn't have it. They couldn't speak out. They were silenced for so long. And you're right. Like, I really believe that our pioneer ancestors are we're freeing them one by one every time we speak our truth and every time we heal ourselves. It really is this back and forth energy that I think we're working together. Yeah. To raise the vibration of this whole situation and the planet. Like, it's so big. You're right. It's so big. And what, as we leave the church, I mean, my experience, as with many others, is so lonely and traumatic, but it's actually, like you're saying, they're walking with us through that, and they're cheering us on for being brave enough to do it. And I have felt that from my grandfather so much. And that's a message that I want to share with everyone as well. It's like, when you do leave and you do feel so alone, like, you can lean on your ancestors, because there's nothing more that they want than for you to be free from what held them bound. And so we are not alone. And and they're sending so much love as well, so much love. And like you said, they didn't know how profoundly they were deceived. They had no idea. They didn't have the information we have. Yeah. And we are so lucky to have what we have now, to be able to free not just ourselves, but our children and our family line. I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more. Yeah.
So as I have gone on this journey, my communication with the other side is getting more clear. And so I wrote my book with my grandfather, actually. And
I love that.
Yeah, I am almost like it's my baby, right? And so it's kind of scary to share it because it's such a sacred thing to me.
Mm-hmm.
But as I wrote, it was so healing for me to write some of the things that he wanted me to share.
Mm.
And one of the things that he wanted me to share was, the movie Moana, and how Moana is trying to return the heart to this monster. I forgot her name.
Mm-hmm.
But this lady is only a monster because her heart was stolen. And my grandfather really wanted me to listen to this song, I Know Who You Are, from that movie.
Mm-hmm.
And Moana returns her heart, the heart, to this monster. And she says, I know this is not who you are.
Mm-hmm.
You're so much more than this. And when she returns the heart to this monster, she returns back to her true, authentic self, like her true love, her true purpose. And I was thinking a lot about why my grandpa wanted me to listen to that song. And the reason he wanted me to do that is because he wanted me to understand that the reason the leaders of the church have done this from the beginning is because they lost their heart.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have it anymore. And when we go through, have programming and trauma that causes us to lose our heart, we make really horrible choices and we hurt so many people.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, as we are healing generations by leaving, but also when we process the anger and when we get through and do the work of our own healing, there's something really profound that we can do. And that is to lead them. Like, now it's our time to lead them. We lead the leaders of the church, and we lead them with our love.
Mm-hmm.
And we help them rediscover how to come back home to themselves, because honestly, I don't think they know how. They don't know.
I agree.
They don't know how to do the inner work. They don't know how to tell the truth. They don't know how to take responsibility. These are all actions of someone who has lost their heart.
Yeah.
And so now is our time to lead them with love.
I love that.
And And yeah, my grandpa just kept giving me messages like that, and I was so grateful for that, because there's so much anger you need to process when you leave. There's so much you need to work through there, and just the difficulty of reclaiming your life and your mind and your power is profound. But there's so much healing that's wanting to come through from the other side.
There really is.
And I just wanted to, there's so much more to say, but I just wanted to say this one last thing. And it's a paragraph from my book. And it is to the single mother who is frantic because her child lost his Sunday shoes and they'll be late for church again. You are always worthy. To the father that feels so much shame because he's struggling to provide for his family and serve callings, you are always worthy. To the souls who have big questions and don't feel comfortable subscribing to all the church's teachings and doctrines, you are always worthy. To the children who have taken their lives because what they feel in their hearts is not accepted in the faith of their family, you, dear heart, were always worthy. To the people who have lost themselves in substance abuse because they do not know any other way to cope with their pain, you are always worthy. To the couples who are facing divorce due to differing beliefs, you are both worthy. To those who look for love, acceptance, and compassion in all the wrong places, you are always worthy. To those who believe that if they just try harder, pray harder, study harder, give more, and have more faith, then they could be good enough, you are always worthy. To the parents who feel responsible for a wayward child, you are always worthy, and so is your child. To the man who finally reaches the higher levels of the priesthood, you are always worthy. To the soul who feels so much shame for the privileges taken away due to what the church deems to be a mistake, you are always worthy. To those who do not have enough funds to feed their families and pay 10% of their income to the church, you are always worthy. To those who feel the weight of the world on their shoulders and are asked to serve another calling they are too afraid to refuse, you are always worthy. To those who have been shamed for their trauma and want to curl inside of themselves to hide forever, you are always worthy. To the LGBTQIA+ community, you are always worthy. To the woman who has to shut down her dreams to fill the roles the church demands of her, you are always worthy. To those who finally get to enter the temple so their family can be sealed together forever, you are always worthy and already bound and connected to your family on a spiritual level with energetic cords and love that are unbreakable before you ever set foot in that building. You are worthy. All of us are worthy. And this is the most profound thing that I learned on my exit from the church, that we are all worthy.
Wow. I don't even know how to speak after that. That is so beautiful and so emotional. And I don't know any of us who couldn't identify with being in one of those categories that you talked about. What a profound, profound message. And, I think it's so beautiful that not only did you, excuse me, not only have you taken this message from your grandfather and use it to heal him, to heal your previous generations, to heal yourself, to heal your posterity, but you're using it now, you're using your voice now to help heal everybody else too. And it's like the most selfless thing you can do for humanity. It's just help heal. What a gift you are. What a gift.
Oh my goodness, thank you. I hope that's kind of what this is at. Like, what I experienced with my grandfather was so profoundly healing that it would be wrong of me to not share this. It would be so wrong of me to not share this. And I am so scared. My book's coming out in a few days, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm terrified, and I've already gotten some kickback from my family. But the healing that we can receive from realizing the truth and rediscovering our own light and knowing that we have always been good enough, yep, and that we were just in the wrong environment is so profound for a life, especially the lives of children and the vulnerable. I feel very passionately about it, as you already know, I'm sure. Yeah.
Kendra and I, you actually mentioned that at the very beginning, this idea of being unable to heal in the same environment that caused your trauma. Kendra and I actually talk about that all the time, that it's impossible to heal in the same places that you've received your trauma. You have to extricate yourself out of those environments in order to find that healing. Yeah, it's, oh man, I have so much to say. I don't even know how to organize my thoughts. I feel like everything that comes out of your mouth, I've got like 10 responses for. But yeah, absolutely amazing. By the time this podcast airs, your little book baby will be out into the world. I will say this. I know it's scary. I think, at least I won't speak for everybody else. I think I can speak for some people. When you first come out of these types of paradigms and you have to shift your thinking, it can be the scariest thing in the world to use your voice when you've been taught to be silenced your whole life. And remaining silent is also what contributes to our own bodily harm, bottling up our truth and not speaking our truths. And so I will say you're probably going to continue to receive pushback from some people. A lot of people don't want people to speak because it makes them call into question their own experiences. And that's not your responsibility. your responsibility is to speak your own truth, and you have the right to do that. Your truth is yours and yours alone. And you take that power, and I don't mean power in a power structure sort of way, but just in an energetically powerful way. Take that power, run with it, use your voice, speak your truth, heal yourself, and in so heal others around you. I, for one, am ridiculously excited to get my hands on this book and to read it. I'm super excited for its release. Tell us again the title of your book and where people can find it.
Okay. It's called Always Worthy: Healing Generational Trauma in Mind, Body, and Spirit. And right now it's available on Amazon. And right now we only have the Kindle version available, but I'm hoping to do the paperback soon as well. So
that's awesome. That's so awesome. And where can people find you on social media, or how can they connect with you?
Oh yeah, right. I'm on TikTok, and it's at Ashley Denton Coaching. TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. But also, I just started a Facebook group called Always Worthy Community, and in this Facebook group, since I started realizing that I can communicate with the other side, I wanted to strengthen that. And the way I like to use training wheels to help me get better at that, I would really love to be able to be a medium. But so I'm a tarot reader, and I read tarot. And for this Always Worthy group, I specifically read messages for people who are going through faith crisis, or like the deconstruction from high demand religion. And the messages that have been coming through are so sweet. And actually the message for today was from our ancestors, and it was about how they'll do whatever it takes to help us because they want us to be free. And I think that's so funny because we talked about it just barely. So I run that group, and it's a group where people can ask questions and get help, and, just talk about how they're feeling as well. And yeah, so that's where you can find me.
That's awesome. I actually just joined that group a few days ago, and
oh, you did?
I did. I joined that group a few days ago, and I think what you're doing in there is so phenomenal. As a side note, I also have really embraced tarot reading. So that really spoke to me as well. I know people have various thoughts and feelings about tarot. It's been a really powerful modality for me. I tell people it's not fortune telling at all. What it does for me is it causes me to ask myself deeper questions and connect with ancestors and my cheerleaders on the other side. It's actually one of the cheapest forms of therapy I've ever done.
Right?
Yeah, it's a really amazing form of therapy. And it just causes me to connect better to my own intuition, which is something I feel like coming out of high demand religion, cult, that sort of thing, we're so disconnected from, because we're taught to ascribe all of our decision making and whatnot to outside sources. And so for a lot of people, myself included, coming out of this type of paradigm, it's really tough and hard to internally get back inside and listen to my own voice. And tarot has really helped me to do that. So I think it's phenomenal that you offer that to people. What another beautiful gift. So, yeah.
Well, I'm glad you're in my group.
Thank you.
Awesome.
I'm glad to be there. Yeah. I'll be more active going forward.
It's still also a baby, so
yeah. I suspect it's going to keep growing if you keep doing this work. So, yeah.
I definitely will.
Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to add to your story or tell us today?
I just want to thank you for listening to me cry and giving me space to tell my story. It means a lot, actually.
You're welcome. Thank you for allowing me to cry with you and for us to cry with you. And thank you for being here with us. And above all, thank you for your vulnerability and for trusting us with your story. Our goal as always, is just to be a safe place for people to be able to speak their truths. And it's always an honor when people come and feel safe enough to be able to share with us. So we appreciate it.
I'm very grateful that you guys do what you do.
Yeah, that's kind of one of our ways of healing too. So, everybody's got their way, and this is kind of one of the ways we heal, is by helping others to find their voices and give them a space to do that. So, well,
it's beautiful.
I just want to wish you all the best. I think this book is going to it's going to touch a lot of people. And I think a lot of people coming, especially coming out of Mormonism, will really resonate, because we were so, family history was such a big part of our religion. And so, for me, I think that's one of the beautiful things that I can take with me as I've left that religion, is I can still be connected to my ancestors, except in a much deeper, much more beautiful way. And so, yeah, I think a lot of people are going to resonate with your message. And like I said, I'm super excited to read it. So by the time, like I said, everybody's listening to this, it should be available on Amazon. So go check it out and download it, and let us know what you think.
Thanks, Christina.
Thank you so much, Ashley. We appreciate you. Thank you for joining us on Latter-day Survivors. As survivors of trauma and abuse, we wanted to provide a platform for survivors to share their stories. Many survivors of all types of abuse may be able to recognize and relate to the patterns of behavior in the victims, abusers, families, and friends of the stories shared by other survivors on this podcast. Often, as we escape oppressive family, religious, and social constructs to a safer place where we come to see our abuse and all related issues, we are better able to process and begin to heal. We believe that when we share our stories with others, we can also help them to heal. It can take decades for survivors to find the courage to speak about these things. If it is so hard for adults, imagine how difficult it is for a child to speak up. We hope to normalize these discussions so that children can speak to adults earlier. As adults, we must listen and recognize the severity of the abuse, its potential consequences, and the need for action to stop the abuse as early as possible. Just knowing we are not alone, that there are other people who have felt and do feel the same or have endured similar experiences in life, can remind us that we are not alone in this.
I was born in rose-colored water. It seeped into my eyes and soul, and I didn't know the difference. Being blind was beautiful. But no amount of sweet addiction can stop the force of reality. In the bitter recognition, only you can set you free. I don't believe in saints. I don't believe in sinners. It's not black and white in life. It's like gray in the winter. And I don't believe in the kind of love I used to anymore. I jumped ship and I still got my middle fingers pointed from the shore. And it was worth it. If anyone wants to know, it was worth it. Let me reap what I sow. My mother's blood runs through my veins. We haven't spoken years. If we did, maybe I'd ask, what's it like to become your worst enemy? And there's two sides to every story, carved by pain and memory. Time will soften all the edges, but it's still stone I keep with me. I don't believe in saints. like gray in the winter. And I don't believe in the kind of love I used to anymore. I jumped ship and I still got my middle fingers pointed from the shore. And it was worth it, if anyone wants to know.